Hi, everyone. Welcome. So you all are entering and joining our webinar. You are at the SGSO-Network webinar on drip irrigation training with the University of Arizona Community and School Garden Program. Welcome, welcome. We're just going to let folks join for maybe the next minute or so that we have a big enough crew to kind of get started. So welcome. Really glad you're here. We have a very exciting and fun webinar for you today. Great, welcome everyone. We're gonna go ahead and get started. This is the SGSO Network's drip irrigation training with the amazing team at the University of Arizona Community and School Garden Program. You'll see them up on their screen over there. We're gonna go, let's go ahead and dive in. My name is Tristana Perkle and I am the director of the SGSO Network, School Garden Support Organization Network. Awesome. So we're gonna do a little bit of housekeeping. So if we go to the next slide, that'd be great. So a couple of things. So we have a really fun kind of technologically just innovative presentation for you today. So something that will help you in viewing this webinar is if you go up to view in the top right screen and click on side-by-side speaker view, that'll help you kind of have an experience that will be helpful for you to see both the shared presentation as well as the demonstration that will be happening. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share it via email after it's done. And it'll also be archived on our webinar library. We're inviting you to share your questions in the Q&A section. So scroll down and you'll see a specific Q&A section. Feel free to ask your questions if you need clarifying questions throughout the demo. Go ahead and throw them in there, and as questions are relevant, we will be asking those questions of our presenters. Also feel free to ask questions that are kind of more general or more, about funding or other kind of how-tos, and we'll be saving some of those questions that aren't directly relevant to the demo until the end of the presentation. I will be putting a copy of the slides into the chat so that you'll have those in just a moment here. And then there's also going to be a section where we're going to be asking you all for your thoughts and your tips and your ideas. So we'll be compiling all of those into a Google Doc, and we will be sharing that after the webinar. And then finally, your feedback is super helpful for us to continue to put together these webinars, and we'd love for you to share your feedback at the end. I will be putting that link to the chat in just a moment. So this is our agenda for today. I'll be doing a quick intro to the SGSO network, and then I'm going to pass it off to the team to do their drip irrigation training, and then we'll have a fair amount of time at the end for Q&A in addition to the questions that we'll be answering throughout. So just a quick overview of the SGSO network. We're an open peer-to-peer learning network, and our goal is to grow, sustain, and elevate a movement for equitable garden-based education. We do that by providing members at a school, district, regional, state, or national level with professional leadership development, resources, and platforms to connect. Our current avenues for achieving that are through our webinars, like what you're on today, our in-person gatherings. We have our first School Garden Summit, Growing School Garden Summit, in partnership with the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation and Life Lab in just a couple of weeks in Denver that we're very excited for. We also host a number of kind of in-person gatherings at other national conferences, and then partner with Life Lab for our annual Leadership Institute, which will be happening this year in December. So be on the lookout for that. And then we also have our digital commons, which includes our forum and our newsletter. So head to our website, sgsonetwork.org, to sign up for those and receive updates on what we're up to. With that, I'm going to pass it off to the team at the University of Arizona Community and School Garden Program. Passing it off to you all.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're super excited. This is a topic that we really love to talk about, and we get a lot of questions about too with our School Garden Network. So we're just really happy to be here, so happy to see so many participants. And we are here, like Tristana said, with the Community and School Garden Program. And my name is Britt. This is Moses and Caleb. And we're going to be leading the session for you today. Before we get started, we're just going to ask you to first drop a little something into the chat. So if you would go to your chat and let us know how you're feeling about irrigation in this moment, with an emoji, with a response, either way. We just want to see how everybody's feeling before we jump in. Let's see. So we got beginner, a little overwhelmed. Yeah, brain explosion for sure. Excited to learn more. Hi, Hawaii.
Where are those flexing muscles at?
Excited. Yeah, well, thank you. We're gonna keep letting those flow in. And yeah, we see some sunglasses, feeling cool about it. That's great. That's what we like to see. So hopefully by the end of this session, we're all gonna be feeling like that sunglasses emoji, just like real cool, not overwhelmed, feeling a little bit more confident about irrigation. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into the next slide and talk a little about CSGP. So we are the Community and School Garden Program, and we were founded in 2009 and are supported by both the University of Arizona and the Tucson Unified School District. And we support 25 school gardens along with about 3 community gardens, and that's all across Tucson. We do that by teaching a class at the U of A that includes about 120 student interns that help provide maintenance and support to those gardens, and that ends up going up to about close to 5,000 service hours for the semester, which is pretty incredible. So that's really the way that our work happens, and we're so grateful to those folks that make it happen. We also train over 100 educators every year to practice garden-based teaching. So professional development is a huge part of what we do as well. And I forgot to mention that we're coming to you live from one of our school gardens, so you can sort of see it in the back. It's Tucson High School Garden, and so you might hear some planes overhead, some trains in the background. So just bear with us as we come to you live. We can go on to the next slide. So a little bit about drip irrigation and why we like to use drip irrigation at our school garden sites. I'll start with a little bit of my connection to it. So I started this position with the school garden program almost a year ago. And before that, I had no idea that drip irrigation was going to be a part of my knowledge set, nor did I plan for it. And when I first started, it was something that was really intimidating, overwhelming, as some folks said in the chat. And so when I first got started, I had to really rely on the support of my teammates to help me figure things out. But I learned that it's a very forgiving thing, that it's much like school gardens and that it's a trial and error process. So you're gonna make mistakes and you're gonna learn from them, which is really cool. So it's nice to be able to get your hands on a system, figure it out, see where maybe something has gone wrong, and try something new to fix it and learn from that. And it's also kind of like a set of Legos. Everything sort of fits together, and that makes it fun. So now, after almost a year of doing this, I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in this work. But it's a journey, and so even for me on days, it can be a big question mark, you know, and I have to come back to my team and figure things out. So we hope that you'll also find that you can connect with other folks, maybe through this session, to create a little team where you can throw ideas around. So to get back into why drip irrigation, We like to use it because overall, just efficiency wise, it's the best thing to do for a school garden. It takes care of time and scheduling. So for all of you who work with school gardens, you know that if you're teachers, if you're educators, or if you work with them, there's other things happening in the classroom, and maybe you can't always make it out to the garden to do hand watering. And with drip irrigation, you can kind of set it and forget it, which is great. In addition to that, it's low water use, so you have a better rate of evaporation, and that means that you aren't losing water constantly with hand watering, which is awesome. Another thing that it can do that isn't really an issue here in the desert is it can prevent overwatering. Here we could probably water forever and it's fine, but in other places where there's a little bit more rainfall, you can prevent overwatering. That conservation of water also leads to money savings, which is not a bad deal for anybody, so especially the schools that we work with. So those are the big reasons why we like to use drip irrigation. And I think we can go on to the next slide. So our objectives for you today and for this session are first, parts identification and purposes. So we're going to do a brief demo, as Tristana mentioned earlier. So we'll go to another video so that you can see some of those parts in real time. And then 2, we're going to provide resources so that you have something to walk away with after this session and use in your own school gardens. And 3, finally, increase your self-confidence in installing and maintaining drip irrigation. So we really want you to walk away feeling good, feeling like you have some new skills in your back pocket. And yeah, I think we're about ready to get started. So I'm going to hand it over to Moses, and we're going to get started with our demo.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Moses. And I think before we get started on specific parts and procedures, it's always good to start your irrigation project by collaborating with the folks either in your school building or in your school district whose job it is to manage things like plumbing and irrigation. The last thing we want to do is start projects that become problematic for other people. So it's really important that you're checking in with the folks in school buildings and districts to make sure that we're doing projects to their specifications, and also to welcome their support. I feel like one of the magical things about school gardens are that they are gateways for community knowledge to come into the schools. And we want that to be true of every aspect of our school garden, including irrigation. So if there are folks out there with expertise, we don't want to be doing this stuff in our own little silos. So we want that expertise to come in and make the projects that we do work better. Today, we're going to be demoing a hose spigot setup. And so we know that there are many ways to do drip irrigation, that you can also use valve boxes and do in-ground irrigation systems. But we feel like the most approachable way to do irrigation for school gardens is using an existing hose spigot. And so that's what we're going to model for you today. So a couple of things that we find very useful are splitters. And so this side attaches to a hose spigot. So you've got a single hose spigot. This turns it into a 4-way hose spigot. They also make 2-way and 3-way. So you can get one of these based on what your needs are. But what this lets you do is utilize one of the ports for an irrigation system. Maybe this one makes the most sense. And then you still have a few left over, so you can still run garden hoses or fill water cans. Because once you build your irrigation system on a spigot, this thing is dedicated to a port. So if you just attach it to a single hose spigot, that hose spigot then is kind of out of use. When you attach an irrigation to a hose spigot, it's really important that you protect the potable water in the school building. And so, yeah, so the potable water is on the inside of the school building, and out here is your irrigation. Once the water leaves that hose, it's no longer drinking water safe. And so the problem is if there is a negative pressure in the school building, that can cause backflow. And so you can actually get water from an irrigation system siphoning back into a potable water system. And we want to keep our kiddos safe in our school system. So you need backflow prevention to get started. If you're building new hose spigots for a garden setup, or let's say that you're building an irrigation system from the ground up, you're bringing water to the first time to a garden system, it's really important to use a backflow valve. And so this bigger unit is called a PVB valve, a PVB valve, and that's pressure backflow valve. So this would get installed. This is more like you need a plumber to do this, but this gets installed before your hose spigots for your garden, and this provides the highest level of backflow prevention to your gardens. So this is the best place to start for if you're really starting ground up and you're really bringing water to your garden for the first time. Make sure that you have a PVB valve installed before your hose spigots. This will give you the best protection for the potable water in the school building. If your hose spigots are existing already, the next level of protection is a vacuum breaker. And these just screw on. And so we've got a plastic one. The benefits of plastic is they're inexpensive, but they don't last that long. And then you've got a brass one. They're more expensive, but they last a lot longer. This vacuum breaker just screws right in before your splitter. And so everything on this side is protected now against backflow, dirty water siphoning back into your school building. If you're not using a splitter, this can go on right before your irrigation valve, your timer. So again, vacuum breakers. Caleb's going to get into it in a little bit, but this is hose thread. Everything in this assembly that we're going to demo today is hose thread. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So I think that's that. I'm going to hand off to Britt.
Hey everyone. So let me get everything put together here. So as Moses was just talking about, pressure regulation is a really important thing, and everything that he was just talking about is all pressurized, and we start to get to this part of the system that is unpressurized, and that begins with your timer. So we recommend these kinds of timers. You can find them really at any hardware store. And what's nice about them is that you can set your times. It's kind of like a little wheel of fortune. And you can set your durations, set your clock, all that good stuff. And it's really an easy interface to use. It connects, like Moses was saying, with that hose thread here, and again at the bottom here. And you can set it right to auto, and that allows you to just kind of set it and forget it. What's great about that for school gardens is that, as you know, we were saying before, we work with communities that aren't necessarily going to be in the gardens all the time. Maybe not even early in the mornings or late at night, or even on the weekends. And so this system right here really allows you to walk away from that and kind of forget about it, which is great. So that comes up next in your system. So the water is going to be flowing this way. We'll just make a little drop. This is your hose timer. And next up in our system, we have our pressure reducer. So I'll hold that up so everybody can kind of get a good look at it. And again, as I was talking about that, so this part of the system is unpressurized. So it's important for us to regulate that pressure and make sure that the off and on of the timer, so because it's turning off and on frequently, it sort of like acts as a little mini dam, right? And so when you have all of that water backed up on one side, when it's off, it kind of just wants to rush out all at once. And we don't want that for the system because what that can lead to is blowout on your fittings. And then, you know, if you use one of these regulators, it really helps to prevent that and extend the life of the overall system. So we recommend, and it is recommended just in general, 20 to 30 PSI. And so that comes up right there. And yeah, like I was saying, it just really helps for the longevity of the system, makes it so that we can get some slow and long duration watering, which means that you end up getting deeper watering and better roots in your garden. So, so yeah, that's a really important piece in the overall system. Up next, I just dropped a piece, so give me a second. But this is your filter, and inside it usually has a little, there it is. I just opened it and it flew out the other end. So it has a filter that sits on the inside. This helps to prevent particles coming into your line. And so that's things like calcium deposits that can end up clogging a line and then, you know, end up creating some blowout in your lines as well. So having these filters is super important. This is an inline filter. I'll write that down real quick so everybody can see it. Yep. And I'll label this pressure reducer too. So this is an inline filter. As I was saying, it has that filter on the inside, and I'll hold it up a little bit. You can see that hose thread again, and on the other side, that's going to come up next in your system. And every once in a while, you may have to pull out that filter just to clean it out, wash it out, make sure that if there's any gunk in there, it gets taken out so that it can just run the way that it should. And next up, we have our adapter. So this is going to make this whole system connect to the rest of your poly line. That is going to be, so it's going to look like this. And that's going to take all of the rest of the water to your garden spaces. So on one end, you'll see that there's hose thread. On the opposite end, you'll see this little white piece, I think everybody can see it, that is a compression fitting. And what that does is help to seal and prevent leaks and really grab onto that poly. You'll want to make sure that this poly line is the correct diameter for this fitting, and so that it just sits in there perfectly. And I think that that is that on this part of the system. So let me just write down for everybody: adapter, inline filter, pressure reducer, and timer. All right, and I'm going to hand it off to Moses, and get you started on the next set.
Right. I saw some questions in the chat about diagrams and labeling parts. We have a really great worksheet that we are going to share towards the end of this presentation that has exploded diagrams of all of the parts that we just demoed along with pricing. Yeah. So what Britt just shared with us was how we get the water from your supply out towards your garden, and then how you control backflow, how you reduce pressure, and then the timer, which sets the duration and timing for the amount of water that you're going to send to your garden. What I'm going to show you now is once you have a water supply going out to the garden, how do you deliver water to those garden beds? And so you've got some choices. All right. So once you've got your water supply to your garden bed, really your three main choices for how you deliver water that we recommend. There's a lot more you can do. There's sprayers, sprinklers, individual drip emitters. But what we think works best in school gardens for efficient watering is Dripline. And so we have, all right, I'm going to start with big scale. We have drip tape. And so you can see how thin walled it is. Once it gets filled, it kind of fills up like a water bag. And then there are little holes that drip the water out. I can tell looking at this that we've got 6-inch spacing on the drip tape. They make them in 6-inch. They also make them in 12-inch. The further spaced out your emitters are on your drip line, the less expensive it is. Also, I think that it fails less. I think that each one of the spots where it drips is a point of failure that's going to need some maintenance. So for me personally, I usually opt for 12-inch spacing that I feel like we run our irrigation systems enough that we get good water spread. So we're not getting dry spots where it's affecting our plants. Also, plants kind of chase the water, so their roots will spread underground to where the wet spots are in the ground. So for me personally, I always opt for 12-inch spacing. Although I think that everything I have here today has 6-inch spacing on it. So drip tape, this is for big scale. So if you're talking tractor scale, if you're talking thousands of linear feet of irrigation, this is the most affordable way to go. Drip tape, it's sold in giant rolls. It's used in big agriculture, more so than like hobbyist homeowner scale. So it's the least expensive, but it also has the thinnest sidewalls on it and requires the most maintenance. So with all of the materials that I have here today, there's trade-off. And so this is drip tape, and this is the least expensive. I'll put a single dollar sign for it, but it's the most maintenance on it. The connectors for this are also really easy to use. I would say that they're probably the easiest to use for all of them. And so these are slip lock connectors. And so the way that these work is you'll see a barbed fitting here. The barbed fitting slips over the drip tape. And then the locking mechanism is reverse threaded. So I'm going to screw it to the right, and it's going to lock it down. And so once that's there, this is locked in. So no hand strength to do these. They're really easy. So if you were to get a hole in this, you cut it at the hole and you use a coupling like this to join pieces back together. And so that's how these repairs are made. These slip lock connectors are really used for everything. So we've got elbows if you need to turn corners. You've got valves. These valves are really nice for the end of the line. So imagine you have a garden bed and drip tape. You can fold these over and they make clamps for just closing them off. But for me personally, it's nice to put a valve at the end of your rows because you can flush your lines out. So especially when you're installing them, it's really easy to get soil or dirt that contaminates your system. So you turn it on with this open, and it's going to blow out any sand or dirt or calcium deposits in your system, and then you can close it back up, and you can periodically flush your lines if you need to. Flushing your lines, cleaning out your filter baskets, pressure reduction, that's what extends the life of your irrigation systems. It's also, somebody had mentioned there being a lot of plastic waste with irrigation systems, and it's true. So much plastic waste, and most of the stuff that I'm going to show you only lasts a couple of years, but pressure reduction, filters, flushing your lines, that's a way that we can kind of conserve on the plastic that we're using and not create so much waste. Okay, so drip tape, big scale, the least expensive way to put water into your garden beds. The next thing I'm going to show you is called spaghetti line or 1/4-inch tubing. So this is the small stuff. So this is 1/4-inch poly. People also refer to it as spaghetti lines. So this is very thin. Again, this is 6 inches, 6-inch spacing on the emitters. So it drips water out of here and it drips water out of here, 6-inch spacings. This is the next least expensive option. But what I would say is the downfall are the connectors. And so the way that you connect these or repair, so let's say you get a hole. Again, you cut the line where the hole is, and you use a coupling, a connector to join it back together, which eliminates the cut or the hole in your lines. They're these little barbed fittings. And if you can see them, they literally are just barbed connections that you cram into the fittings. They also, you puncture holes in your supply lines. This is supply line. So this is the last piece that comes out of your irrigation timer that delivers the water to your garden. There's no emitters in this. This is pure supply line. But when you transition to this, you poke little holes. Caleb's going to show you this in a second. I'm giving you a sneak peek at it. We love this tool, by the way. So get ready to take notes on this sucker. But when you've got your supply line, it has a hole punch in it. You pop it in, the most satisfying sound and feeling ever. And these parts just like pop in, and then you're connected. But again, of all of the fittings that I'm showing you, these tend to blow apart the most. So these things can blow out, this can blow off, they can leak. So inexpensive, but not the best connections. Right. So that's your spaghetti line. What we tend to use most often in our gardens is 1/2-inch emitter line. Usually it's brown. It's got, so again, it's the same diameter as your supply line, but this has emitter holes in it. So if you can see, this is where the water drips out into your gardens. So this is 1/2-inch poly. And so this is an emitter line. I think that this is probably the best balance. It's the most expensive, but when we're running, most of our garden beds are like 30 or 40 feet long. We'll run 2 or 3 lines in each bed. We kind of spring for the expensive stuff. In our opinion, this stuff lasts the longest, and the connections are the most secure. All of the connections for this 1/2-inch line are compression fittings, which basically means a small hole in a big tube, and you got to make it work. You got to cram them in there. But once they're crammed in there, they don't come apart. So if this were to spring a leak or get a break, again, you cut it right where the break is, and you use the coupling. I'm gonna write down coupling for you. You use a coupling to fix it. And so, yeah. So those are basically the 3 ways to deliver water into your garden beds that we suggest. Did I miss anything? All right, so I think I'm going to hand it off to Caleb at this point. All right.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you virtually. All right, so Britt talked a little bit. I'm going to start by talking about the timer. Britt talked about it a little bit, but we're basically going to go over how to set it and, you know, run times you would use in your garden space. We feel comfortable using this timer because all timers pretty much have the same setup. If you see, this one has an auto setting, set clock, set start time, duration, and run days, as well as an off setting. The hose spigot timers that are these one valve type universally have those settings. So the first thing, set clock, self-explanatory. That's how the timer is going to ensure that it's watering at the correct point in the day. In this model, it's really easy to set with up and down arrows and selection button. You're gonna set start time. This will vary heavily on where you are. Over here in the Arizonan desert, we like to set our timer to go off right before the sun rises to reduce evaporation, and then right at the hottest part of the day to give our plants a little bit of a break from the heat. We'll go over kind of how you know when your garden needs water, but that'll be later in the section. Set duration, again, highly dependent on where you are. But there are some baselines you can follow depending on what you're growing, like vegetables versus, you know, ornamental flowers and such. And run days. This is pretty much going to be every single day. A lot of the timers have rain blocks, essentially, where you can, okay, say it's going to rain for a week straight. You can cancel the watering for a week, and then as soon as that's over, it'll resume. So how do you know what to set your timer to and how long to water for? Again, it's super dependent on where you are, but we have a couple tricks. And one of them involves this tool. If you can see, it's just a long metal rod. It's called the soil probe. And what we do is we use it to figure out how deep water is penetrating in our soil. So you would simply stick this in the ground. There are two things you would figure out with it. You'd figure out how easy it is to push into the ground. That's an indication of how deep your water is going. And then when you pull it out, it'll actually be cool to the touch, depending on what level your garden is watered. So this is a good way to figure out how watered your garden is. And then in addition to that, you're just going to see how your plants are reacting. A little bit of heat stress is fine throughout the day and at the hottest part of the day. Plants can handle it. In fact, if anything, plants like to be a little bit on the dry side. But you'll know if you're overwatering the next morning, that's essentially when plants are supposed to be at their peak health. And if they still look stressed, then I'd investigate further, you know, how much you're watering. And then another variable, so it's climate variant. It's how your plants are performing. And then finally, it's what stage in the growing cycle you're at. So when plants are just little seeds, the top few inches of soil basically need to be watered all the time. You never want the top few inches to run dry, otherwise you risk killing the seed and your plants won't grow. But if you think as your plant grows and it starts reaching into different layers of soil, the roots are coming down, and we really are going to want to change our watering from shallow multiple times a day to spaced out maybe once or twice a day, but you really want to do extended watering periods so that the water penetrates super deep into your root zone. Again, this is all going to vary depending on where you are. So it's hard to give specific numbers of, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I'll just say that at our school gardens, we usually run mature plants at about twice a day for 30 or so minutes. And yeah, it depends on the soil type. We're going to move into pitfalls and pro tips, as we have called it, kind of some tips and tricks we've learned through the years of gardening, and some pro tips that'll help make gardening easier for you. And back to the rainbird irrigation system, a super common problem, and you'd be surprised how often it happens. The teacher reports, hey, we're not getting any water to the garden, what's happening? So if you remember, I said that there's an auto setting on that. All of your irrigation timers need to be set to auto, or else they won't run. So it's as simple as setting it back to where it is. Kids like to play with this in the school garden. We understand that, but definitely that's your first check. Oftentimes, if something's still not working, then troubleshooting is as easy as using the manual button on the garden timers. If you click it, it'll ask how long do you want to do it, and it'll start going. And that's really the time where you have to diagnose what's going on with your system, what's leaking, maybe your hose spigot's leaking. So that's kind of your first troubleshooting go-to. So Moses also brought it up earlier in the setting or in the presentation, but we use hose thread below the timer. We like to use hose thread, and it's actually made for this application because it's intermittent in how long or when it receives pressure. But when you're at the store, it can be hard to tell the difference between the two. So I have two fittings here. This is the vacuum breaker, and this is just an adapter. One is hose thread, and one is pipe thread. So I'll label hose thread, pipe thread. And the main difference is how it creates a watertight seal. With hose thread, there is always this hose gasket. And hose thread is a compression type fitting. So if you think the hose gasket goes right at the top of your male hose fitting, and then it will sandwich right in between whatever you're trying to connect to. And the gasket is what gives you that waterproofing. Like I already said, they're not meant to be pressurized 24/7. Yeah. Pipe thread, on the other hand, is meant to be pressurized 24/7, and its main water sealing method is actually Teflon tape. Maybe you've seen this before. It's really easy to use, but pipe tape or pipe fittings are always going to be on, more industrial sized systems. Whenever you're installing this pressure backflow valve, these are always pipe thread, just because it's meant to be robust. Whenever you're doing this, it's super simple. If you remember, you wrap your pipe tape around your pipe thread in a clockwise fashion. That way, when you're screwing it in, it's actually going with the threads, and you're not undoing your wrapping job right now. So I'm just gonna do a quick demo. It doesn't need to be super crazy, but you just want to try to get all the threads so that you're creating a watertight barrier. All right. Next thing is how to actually get these, irrigation fittings on. These things are really difficult to get on if you've ever tried, but there's a few tips we have, so don't be intimidated by it. One thing to check before you go through the effort of pushing these fittings on, this type of fitting is a universal fitting, so it'll work on any outer diameter hose. The outer diameter is what varies on this pipe thread or pipe. It's always 1/2 inch inner diameter, but this is universal, so it can work on whatever. These compression fittings that have the colored tops are only work for specific outer diameters. So just double check which one you have. So there's 2 main tips we have for you. One of them is to lubricate this end with pretty much anything you have. And excuse me if the train is going to be loud. We sometimes just, give it a little lick or spit on it, use some water. Some people have even used a little bit of aloe vera to lubricate it to get it in. One thing I do is I take my nail and I mark kind of just a light indentation so I know how far I've already gone into the fitting. And then last thing I do is I bend it at kind of a 90-degree angle there. And that really gives me leverage to grab on and use my body weight to push this fitting into it. All 3 of those combined, you should be able to, and I'm struggling here because I'm not using my body weight, but you should be able to put your fitting on. Simple as that. Also, it's fun to just let kids try to hulk on it for a little bit and see who can do it as a little contest. Finally, I want to go through some of the best tools to have around and fittings and parts to have extra in case something breaks. We're definitely going to want to have all the types of pipe diameter you have. So the 1/2 inch, the spaghetti line that Moses was talking about. You always want extra of that, to repair your lines. This purple tool made by Rainbird is the holy grail of drip irrigation gardening. It is super easy to punch holes into this poly line with. You just put it in the channel right there, and if you can see, it'll just pop a hole into it. That makes it really easy to put these fittings in. And then it also has a blade. So suppose your poly line is cracked right here because of sun damage. Super easy just to grab it, cut it off. There you go. Put a new fitting in. Simple as that. You'll always want hose washers. If you ever see your hose spigot leaking or any of these fittings, oftentimes these can be over tightened. They can dry out. So it's a super simple fix just to replace it. Make sure you take out the old one. Otherwise it won't watertight seal. And the last thing I like to carry around are these goof plugs. It's super hard to see because they're really small. But essentially what it is it's just a little, I'm drawing a blown up scale of it. But it's just a super simple fitting that you can punch into any holes that you've made previously. Let's say you pull out your spaghetti line and now you just want to patch that hole. You didn't want to get rid of this plastic. Goof plugs can just pop in there and stop a quick leak. Yeah. So I think that's the end of our pitfalls and pro tips. We're going to share a slide with you that's going to have further resources for you. Moses talked about having an expanded diagram of the irrigation setup. So I think we can go ahead and pull that up. We're also going to afterwards go through some questions that you asked in the chat, and we'll open it up to the team out here and see if we can't answer them. And then the last thing I actually want to say before the further resources is we asked how you felt at the beginning of this this irrigation demo with emojis. I wonder if you'd throw some more emojis in the chat and let us know how you're feeling now. Maybe it's a little overwhelming, but hopefully you've learned a little bit, and hopefully we can answer more from this question and answer chat. Yeah.
All right, we're bringing up one of the resources that we created for you today. Give it just a second. But it's an exploded diagram of the parts that we demoed for you today, along with pricing on it. The pricing is from Home Depot, which we know is not our favorite place to shop, but it's also probably the most approachable place for schools to shop. A lot of times, at least with our district, they have vendor agreements with Home Depot, and that's the vendor that we're allowed to use. Also, when you're doing irrigation and you're in a pinch, that's probably the most accessible place to go. But I would encourage you to find irrigation specialty shops in your area, just because those folks are more knowledgeable and will give you a more tailored customer service experience than just like a Home Depot. But we think the pricing is a valuable thing for you to have, especially if you're writing grants or mini grants to do irrigation in your gardens. It can give you a starting place. So, Pilar, are you able to pull up that worksheet? Oh, this is another, well, I'll talk about this one for a second. This is a document, a PDF that is put out by Rainbird. So this is not our document, but it's super comprehensive. So you're gonna wanna snatch that link from this presentation and use it. This will give you everything you need to know about drip irrigation. And to me, it's probably the most comprehensive irrigation resource that I've found. Very, very user-friendly. We're having a problem bringing up the worksheet. Oh, there we go. I spoke too soon. So this is this is what we put together for you. And so it's got names of the different pieces and pricing available. Also, it's a front back if you want to print it. So the back side of it has like more goodies, pitfalls and pro tips. Yeah. So those are, yeah, there we go. So the list of the tools, the list of the tubing, and then the notes on watering down at the bottom. You will see, even in the DripWorks resource, it'll give you a guide on how to set your irrigation systems. But really, there's no shortcut to kind of knowing the microclimate of your garden, the climate of your region, and paying attention to your plants. So once again, your plants are going to be the first to show you if you're watering too much or you're watering not enough. In the bottom, you see that graphic of a sad little plant. Here for us in the desert Southwest, it's okay for our plants to look like that at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's not okay for our plants to look like that at 7 or 8 in the morning. So if they don't bounce back, we know that we're probably underwatering. That's for us in our region. Also the soil moisture probe, again, you can buy them. They're easy to find and they're not that expensive, but you also could just use like a piece of rebar, a really long screwdriver. But it's good to know how deep you're sending water, and as your plants mature, to send that water deeper and deeper. So when you first are planting your garden, short duration, multiple times a day, and then you back that off for longer durations, less times per day as the plants get mature to encourage deep root growth. Yeah, I would say the exception to that rule are raised bed gardens that we don't want to run long durations because a lot of times they'll flood. You want to make sure you're just keeping the moisture where it needs to be in the raised bed system. So anything else I'm missing on resources? Are we ready to open it up for Q&A?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So Pilar's been pulling up questions from the chat that we didn't get to answer, and we'll go at them. It looks like the first question is how to advocate for the districts to install and manage their irrigation. That's a really tricky one. For us in the school district that we work for, the labor shortage right now is really affected all of the blue collar services within our district. And so I know for us, we're a pretty big school district. We're like 86 school sites. We have 4 plumbers for 86 school site that all are responding to emergency work orders. And so putting in and maintaining gardens is not priority for those guys. So for us, we mostly just do things to their specifications and get their blessing before we do it. That's a great question. I feel like that's a fundamental question, but I also feel like it's so nuanced for where you're at. But I would say, as a general rule, figure out who you should talk to. Like, so do you have somebody that believes in school gardens at the district level in leadership that could get you a meeting with folks from the plumbing or irrigation shop? I would also say listen to their concerns before you share kind of what you want them to do for you, so that you can kind of ground your requests in the reality of what their work looks like. But that is a wonderful question, whoever put that in the chat, and it really is fundamental to doing irrigation work within a school district, is playing nicely with the folks that's their job. So I feel like that was kind of a long non-answer. But it's a great question, and it's a difficult question and an important question.
The next one, how to set up different zones on the same splitter. So the splitter, you could either have multiple timers like this one attached to it. They also sell some of these that have 2 ports instead of just 1. That would be your cleanest solution. But let's say you only have this one. What you could do is when you extend out your garden line with the feed line, you can have those valve fittings that Moses showed you, and just make sure that there's 2 valves, one going to one zone, one going to another zone. That one's going to be a little more labor intensive because whatever zone you have, you're going to have to, or whatever zone you want to water, you're going to need to turn these on and off. So I think the best solution is they actually sell these with 2 of them, and then you can set each zone to its own watering schedule.
Yeah, I've even seen them with 3.
Yeah.
So look online. So it'll attach in one spot, and then it'll have 2 or 3 outlets that can represent different zones. Or you get a splitter like this, a 4-way splitter. You could easily put 2 timers for your different zones and still have 2 open ports for garden hoses.
More zones than that starts to get into like industrial setups. So I think we'll hold off on it now, but it can be done, and it just is going to require some more legwork and research.
The other thing I would say is we get called to work on school gardens that were built a long time ago by people we don't know, and a lot of times they're kind of rat nests of irrigation systems. We came from a site this morning before this webinar where it was just like a labyrinth of mystery irrigation lines all over the place. So I would say simplify your systems as much as you can and run as few zones as you can. I'll show you real quick. We're in the Tucson High School school garden, which I would say is like a medium scale school garden. But we've got 6 beds that are about 40 feet long. And I don't know, I can't see what you're seeing, but we've got fava beans, So this is the last of our cool season stuff. And then we've got tomatoes, chilies, beans, all of our warm season stuff going in here. And then we've got fruit trees on the sides. And even in a garden that big, we have it all running on one zone. And we're able to grow food using one zone. So I would say simplify as much as you can. We have the fruit trees are just on the same garden watering schedule as the garden is. And we can just control how much water comes out on those trees. So if the garden's running a lot for long durations, we can just kind of dial back how much water goes to those trees, and it kind of compensates. All of that stuff is very, very forgiving.
So the next one I see is how to install irrigation in raised beds. And I think Moses, you started to speak to that at the end of yours.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of depends on what kind of raised bed you're talking about. But one thing that we like to do is kind of poke through the raised bed, maybe 2 inches or 3 inches below the top of it, because we really don't like running irrigations over the top of the raised beds. And so we use a lot of metal stock tanks, like galvanized stock tanks, and we'll use like a 1/2-inch hole saw to pop a hole through the stock tanks and then run an elbow through, 2 or 3 inches below the top. So it's a nice clean solution. I feel like that would be easy to do on wooden raised beds. The more difficult would be like concrete or masonry raised beds, but you still could do it. You still could get a masonry bit and drill a 1/2-inch hole a few inches below and snake it in. But I feel like that's really important. But with a raised bed, you just want to keep the water where your root zone is. And we found with raised beds, you can't water raised beds like in-ground beds or they flood. I feel like we end up with swampy raised beds. So instead of like in a vegetable garden where we might be running twice a day for 20 minutes, in a raised bed, we might be running 3 times a day for 5 minutes or something like that. Another thing, when I was showing you the garden that we probably should have mentioned in our pro tips, you'll notice that there's a lot of mulch on the ground, and we're still working on this garden and we're going to be putting more and more mulch. But one way to extend the life of your irrigation system is to keep it out of the sun. So burying your supply lines, burying your emitter lines under mulch. If you can keep the UV rays off of any of your plastic, it's going to last a lot longer. So I would say in raised bed and in-ground gardens, if you can bury your emitter lines in mulch, that's going to conserve water. It's going to build the health of your soil, and it's also going to extend the life of the plastic lines.
Yeah, so where does the water come out of the 1/2-inch polyline? So there's 2 types of polyline, and Moses will show you the difference.
Yeah. So supply line is what brings the water out of the hose timer to wherever your garden bed is. And this is just solid tubing. There's no holes that let water out. You transition to this stuff in your garden beds. It's really hard to see, but there's your emitter right there. And they're either every 12 inches or every 6 inches. They drip out. That's where the water comes out. They're supposed to be pressure compensating, which means that at the very end of your line where there's less water pressure, it's still supposed to drip out a consistent amount because there's higher pressure the closer you get to your water source. And so it's supposed to be pressure compensating. So the emitter lines that are closest to your water supply should be giving you about the same amount of drip that at the end of your system does. Those are too large for the smaller tubes to fit in snugly. Oh yeah. So I think you're talking about, the next one has to do with the holes kind of getting stretched out, and it doesn't, like the barb couplings don't fit in anymore.
Yeah, at that point, you're gonna pull out the purple tool that Moses has, or any cutting tool, and you're just gonna completely cut it off.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not cutting it right next to an emitter, but like right in between the emitters. Yeah. And then you're just gonna put a new section of pipe. Once it Once the hole is too big for those to fit snugly, then
They
the
leak.
pipe, yeah, it's gonna leak all the time, and you're gonna,
or blow off.
yeah.
So I'm ruining this one right now. So this was a nice, tight, snug fit. Also, that's another great thing about this tool is it pops your hole the perfect diameter, so it's tight and it won't leak. If you're using like a knife or like some other random tool, you're probably not going to get nice, tight holes. But so the question is, this is the hole for where you're transitioning to the spaghetti line. What happens when this hole gets too big and it just is leaking or this comes out? There's really no fix to it. You got to cut it right on the hole where the bad hole is. You splice in another piece, you use your coupling. So you put it out here and then you pop a brand new hole close to where the other one is so you can get a nice fresh hole. But really, anytime you've got a played out hole, you've got to cut and repair your line and then put a new tight hole in.
How many output fittings are on a line? Are too many?
I don't feel like I've ever gotten there.
We have setups that have multiple 50-foot garden beds spanning over hundreds of feet. And we haven't hit the limit of our water pressure. If you're talking about spacing, like 12-inch versus 6-inch, I think it just depends on what you're growing. And I know Moses was talking about that, but as far as like water pressure, how many fittings are going to lower it too much for it to keep operating? We haven't hit the limit in our school garden.
We also like to think of low water pressure as a benefit to drip irrigation. The lower the pressure, the longer your system's going to last and the deeper you can push your water. So we recommend for drip irrigation, water pressure, buying pressure reducers that are somewhere between 20 and 30 PSI. I always err towards the 20 side. And if we have tons of fittings on the same tube and it is really low, you just run your system a little bit longer to get the amount of water that you need. But in the end, it's just a judgment call. So let's say that we had repaired this thing 1 billion times and we have like a fix here, a fix here, a fix here, lines. Like eventually you pull the plug on it and you cut that section out, toss it and start and build a new section. It's just a judgment call. But Britt referred to these as like Legos, which is a really great way to think about it. So when you reach that point with too many fittings, cut that section out, toss it, and build something new.
Yeah, and I think the next question is similar to one we already answered about different zones. How many?
Hey, Moses and team,
Yes.
Yeah.
can y'all just so that we're following along with which question you're answering, do you mind just asking the question first and then answering it? That would be super helpful for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that next one is, can I put a splitter on after the timer so that I can adjust which parts of my garden are getting water?
Absolutely.
And that's a yes. So we can kind of show you what that would look like. Moses is grabbing a few parts.
Yeah, in fact, absolutely. You don't use a splitter like this though. These are all hose connections. You use splitters like these. So let's say that, this out so it's not confusing. We've transitioned from the hose to the poly and we want to send water out to a bunch of different garden beds. You use T fittings. So this is going to send it in 2 different ways. And let's say maybe you've got one raised bed over here, one raised bed over there. You could put shut-off valves at each one. So maybe you're only farming one of your garden beds. You could turn one on the off position, and you can do this as much as you like. In that garden, in the Tucson High Garden where we're at here, we have shut-off valves at the heads of every single row because yeah, when we're planting, we don't always get it all planted at once, and there's no sense in running irrigation beds in that we're not farming. Also, at the end of the school year, we're gonna shut this garden down to the most extent, especially those rows that have fava beans in them. We're going to harvest all those fava beans out. So over the summer, we might only be farming three rows here. So having shutoff valves before each one of your garden beds is just really helpful. Gives you that control.
Yeah, and I think that relates to another question that was asked prior to the section, like how do you manage your gardens in the summer? Over here, we, as much as we can, we try to shut them down over the summer. It's really hard to have like a staff member come out and be monitoring the system, you know, when they're not on time. So as much as we can, we plant just like crop cover stuff, or we just completely shut down the garden beds, get our seeds and stuff ready for next, you know, season. Yeah, I don't know if you two want to talk about that more.
Yeah, I mean, garden when it makes sense for the climate where you're at. Here in Tucson, when it's like 110 degrees, it's not fun to farm. So the kids aren't in school mostly anyways. So it makes a lot of sense for us this time of year to start working towards a shutdown on the gardens, mulch the beds really good before we leave, or like Caleb was saying, plant cover crops. There's a couple of desert adapted beans that we grow really well down here, tepary beans and cowpeas. So you could seed all of those into a garden also and set it and forget it and come back to jungles of beans when the kids come back. And beans are great too because they can dry on the plant and just sit there for the summer, and kids can still collect beans when they come back in. So thinking about your climate, your school year, what's happening in the summer, but don't be afraid to shut the gardens down when it makes sense to shut the gardens down.
Yeah, I think, Pilar, if you can scroll down, I think we got to that next question there. So the next one says, what about seed germination time when you're planting something like a row of radishes and you need to have them stay misted until sprouted?
Yeah, we addressed that a little bit. Whenever you're planting seeds or seedlings, you're going to want shorter run times, but like multiple times throughout the day, so you have consistent moist soil all the time. It's also not a bad idea when you're planting by seeds or seedlings to supplement your irrigation system when you can. So during the school week or while your people are there, to give it a mist with a hose, or to have students hit it with watering cans, especially when you've got new seeds in the ground or seedlings. Also, I would say a little bit about hardening plants off when you get new seedlings. Most of the time they're greenhouse grown, and so they can shock really hard. Drip systems are only the irrigation systems that we're talking about today only put moisture into the soil. But for that first week or so, when you're putting brand new baby plants that have been in a greenhouse in the ground, it's really great to give them some foliar watering. So the drip system's hitting the soil, but throughout the week, spray them with the hose, or have kids water them with watering cans where you're watering the foliage of the plant as well to help prevent shock.
And then the next one we have is a vacuum breaker needed only if you're using a timer? Is it normal for a vacuum breaker to bleed or spray out water every few minutes?
Every few minutes is a lot. So I would say no, that it's not normal for it to bleed or spray out every few minutes. Every now and then, for just like a little bit, it's okay because that's a check valve for it to like spritz a little bit out the side and then stop. But if it's doing it every few minutes, I think it's time to replace your vacuum breaker, which can be challenging because if they've been on there for a while and you have hard water, it's probably calcified on there. So getting something like WD-40 and soaking it, spraying WD-40 on it a couple days before you try to get that off is probably a good idea. Is the vacuum breaker needed only if you're using a timer? I would say if the water's turned on all the time on your spigot, then you need a vacuum breaker. If you're just using a garden hose that you turn on and turn off, you're not going to have the same problem. You're not going to have backflow problem because you're going to have water. When it's just a hose, you turn the hose on and and the water is going this way. It's when the hoses, it's when the stagnant water sits in the lines that you have the danger of backflow, water contamination. There's a lot of questions on like when to use these and not use these. Even the brass ones, it's like a $10 part. I don't know. I'm guessing. Just be safe. You know, if you're putting 500 bucks into an irrigation system, don't go cheap on your vacuum breaker. If you have any doubt at all, throw a vacuum breaker on it, and then you'll have the peace of mind that you're not contaminating a water source in the school.
So I think we've come up on time, and I just want to check in with you, Tristana. I'm thinking we can probably take the rest of the questions that we have on this document and just address them afterwards, and maybe share out this document to the participants so that everybody can get their questions answered.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you all so much. That is a great plan. We will include a link to this Google Doc in the webinar recording library. So there's a little section for each recording, and that allows us to include links to different resources. So for everyone who registered for this webinar, you will be receiving an email probably tomorrow once we've gotten everything organized, or maybe a couple of days to allow these folks to answer all your amazing questions. And you'll get a link to that. So so just be looking for that in your email. Just want to close out by saying thank you, Moses, Caleb, Britt, and Pilar behind the scenes. This is just a truly incredible webinar. I've seen so many thank yous come through the chat. Very innovative and engaging. Just really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your time. We just so appreciate it. Thanks for joining our webinar, y'all. Follow us at SGSO-Network on any of the social media, or jump over to sgsonetwork.org to find other webinars and other ways to connect with your community just like this. This webinar came together because someone asked for a drip irrigation training on our Google forum, and Moses saw it and said, hey, we could do that. So if you have other needs, just join our forum and share it. And you can also share your expertise just like these folks did. So thanks, everyone. Thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.